2 has been a very interesting remake. Not the least of which because it turned out so awful. But, nobody's really talking about this game. It hasn't really left an impact. But what we've essentially seen is an IP that was Nintendo exclusive for years suddenly, inexplicably go multiplat. And when it came to 4 and 5, Nintendo was in the title screen credits. They were still involved in some capacity, right? There was some weird things about the 4 and 5 re-releases as well. But 2 doesn't seem to have Nintendo involvement at all, even though it was announced during a Nintendo Direct, and even though it did indeed launch day and date with other versions. So, essentially, Fatal Frame 2 Remake is the very first Fatal Frame game to launch on all platforms ever. Okay, essentially. So, this is the first ever, multi-plat Fatal Frame game, and it is terrible, okay? It is awful. It is so much worse than 4 and 5, it's not even funny, okay? The game looks worse, it plays worse, the ghosts are spongy as shit, and they didn't really do anything that really improved the core experience. If anything, I think the new Last of Us style, behind-the-shoulder camera angle makes the game worse, because the game was very specifically designed with fixed camera angles in mind, okay? So, this is a really interesting example of a classic game being actively sabotaged by modernization, okay? They didn't change all that much about it outside of, the core gameplay, from my understanding, but even that was enough to, completely butcher the experience to the point where, nobody is enthusiastic about this. Nobody was hyped for this. Nobody thought this was going to be good. Nobody was, nobody besides me that thought this was going to be good. This is, a game that's kind of come and went already. It's been a complete disaster. And I've said a lot about this already. I was really surprised with how bad the game ended up being. I was really surprised about, the mentality that some people have towards this IP. I've talked a lot about, what's been going on with this. And I kind of came to a decision about how I feel about this and what I think happened. Very specifically, why this game was remade for a second time. Because if you think about it, this isn't the first time this has happened. Because Dragon Quest VII was a 3DS game that had Nintendo's involvement. The 3DS version of Dragon Quest VII was localized with Nintendo's involvement. Nintendo completely owns the 3DS version of Dragon Quest VII, the localization for it. And so the reason why Square had to remake the game again, and why they redid the visuals, and why they had a new localization, and why they put all this extra effort in for a game they remade already, was entirely to circumvent Nintendo's involvement and to release the game on all platforms, right? They were doing a sneaky move, okay? And I think with Fatal Frame 2, we have a similar situation, in which Nintendo funded the original remake of Fatal Frame 2. It was a Wii exclusive, with improved visuals, with new mechanics, took advantage of motion controls, I believe. I'm not an expert on the Wii make, but and Koei Tecmo remaking Fatal Frame 2 again was their way of trying to weasel out of that initial version. They are just remaking a game that already existed again to weasel their way out of the Nintendo contract or whatever partnership they had. And we don't actually know what the partnership was exactly, because a while back, the belief was that Nintendo co-owned Fatal Frame. They funded 4 and 5. They were exclusives for a long time. We don't actually know, what the arrangement was or how it ended. And it does seem like, unfortunately, as a Fatal Frame 2 remake, it has ended, and Koei Tecmo is doing everything it can to try and weasel its way out of its Nintendo audience. But it's one of those things where this IP has been stagnant for so long after they refused to make more of these after 5 that now nobody really thinks back to Fatal Frame 2 fondly. There are a couple of hardcore fans online who will say that this is one of their favorite games ever, but it's very much a niche thing. Honestly, I would even argue that Silent Hill and Resident Evil have become kind of niche at this point. The industry has moved on from this genre, essentially. They're not really trend-setting. They're not really seen as particularly adult. They're not really ahead of their time. They're not really all-time classics. Like, Fatal Frame 2, at one point, I think, could have been considered one of the best games ever. You know, because of its presentation, because of the cinematics, because of the themes, because of how, like, scary it was. But now it's like, you know, in 2026, it just feels like Fatal Frame has been, like, outdone so many times by so many other horror games that, like, nobody really even remembers or cares about it. So, you know, Fatal Frame's big return to multiplatism, you know, where they tried to kick Nintendo to the curb and tried to go multiplat, you know, it was a wet fart. You know, it was a gigantic failure. And it really does remind me of what Platinum did with the Wonderful 101 and with the Nintendo exclusives, because all they had to do to be successful was to just make their games on Nintendo hardware. That's it. You know, Nintendo would be willing to fund them. They would partner with them. They would, like, give them IPs. They would, like, you know, all of Platinum's successes throughout the 2010s could be attributed directly to Nintendo's involvement. You know, Nier Automata was not a success. Like, Platinum was desperate to be this studio that developed games for, like, every platform other than Nintendo. And in the end, they, like, they refused to work with Nintendo in any meaningful capacity. And this just led to, like, you know, Scalebound getting canceled. This led to Kamiya leaving the company. This led to, like, that stupid Kickstarter campaign. And now the company is a shell of its former self, to the point where, like, nobody even, like, has any real expectations for them. You know, in spite of, like, Bayonetta 3 and Stories and the Lost Demon being as good as they were because of Nintendo's involvement. And it seems like it's the same way with Fatal Frame, is that Fatal Frame was on life support because of Nintendo's involvement for a long time. We were getting, like, high-profile, great games from them. They were innovating, they were experimenting, they were doing things. And then Nintendo pulls out, or they're kicked to the curb, or whatever, and the quality just drops like a rock, okay? Like, it is crazy how, when you look at, like, Fatal Frame 2 Remake, you can see how this doesn't look as good as Fatal Frame 4, a game that came out in, like, 2008 on the Wii, okay? It doesn't look as good as Fatal Frame 5, you know, a Wii U exclusive, okay? Like, Fatal Frame 2 just has all this, like, jank to it that just makes it, like, completely unplayable. You know, there's all these reasons not to play the remake, this remake of Fatal Frame 2, and it just goes to show you, like, what the end result of pandering to other consoles is going to be, is because they absolutely had a shot at becoming the premier Nintendo horror franchise. Like, all they had to do was just partner with Nintendo, keep working with them, keep throwing in the goofy Nintendo costumes, keep getting people invested, keep, like, trying to innovate with new locations, characters, ideas, storylines. Like, all they had to do was just keep doing what they were doing with 5 again, and they just couldn't do it. Like, they just refused to commit. They refused to put any real resources into this IP. And if they had, like, produced a Fatal Frame 6 early on in the Switch's lifespan, and were just like, guess what? We produced the horror game on Switch. And, you know, you hold up the Switch and use it like a camera. That's actually a thing about Fatal Frame 2 Remake that's really interesting, is that, like, holding the Switch in tablet mode, in handheld mode, it really does feel like you're holding a camera, and it's weirdly immersive. It's great. They could have done that early on with the Switch. They could have put out a Fatal Frame 6 as a Switch exclusive, but they didn't. Like, instead, they decided to chase the dragon of, like, releasing on all platforms, and this is the end result of that. And this is not a trend that's going to go away. You know, none of the re-releases of Fatal Frame have done particularly well, and seeing how Fatal Frame 2 has, I think, done worse than any of them, I think it's safe to say that the IP is completely dead. You know, unless they come crawling back to Nintendo and beg for resources and beg to be supported, I don't see, like, the series continuing after this point. And honestly, after this remake, good riddance. I don't want a Fatal Frame that is a Nintendo exclusive. I don't want to see these games get made without Nintendo's involvement, because you have proven to yourself that you have no idea what you're doing.